Hello, and welcome to Vita Spiritual Learning Center. I'm Gary Takesian. I'm a Science of Mind practitioner here at Vita, and it is my honor to bring you today's message. Our theme for 2022 has been Living Everyday Wonder, and each month we have focused on a different aspect of that theme. And this month we'll be looking at Living the Everyday Wonder of Work. And today's title, Creating a Life That Matters. As you may have guessed from the intro, we're going to be looking at this idea of creating a life that matters in the context of work. And to further examine the idea, one of the things we will be looking at is the difference between work and jobs. And to start us off, I would like to share with you a quote from one of my favorite progressive Christian theologians, and that's Matthew Fox. And he said this: "A job is something we do to get a paycheck and to pay our bills. Jobs are legitimate at times, but work is why we are here in the universe. Work and calling often go together." That distinction is significant for us since many of us use the words job and work interchangeably. How many times have we heard or said it ourselves, "Sorry, I have to go to work tomorrow"? The important part of that is the words "have to," being compelled by some outside force, which doesn't indicate passion or purpose. In the quote from Matthew Fox, he suggests that work plays a much more significant role than a mere job. Work, as he sees it, is the reason we're here, our life's calling, something that stimulates our imagination and spurs us into action. Work that we feel passionate about gives meaning to our lives and facilitates our contributions to the world. Another word that encompasses the idea of meaningful work is vocation. The word vocation comes from the Latin vocare, or voice. Vocation is therefore about listening to the voice of spirit that lies within and allowing it to express in, through, and as each of us. The Quakers have a saying, "Let your life speak." And a quote from author Parker Palmer echoes that same idea. He says, "Before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am." When we allow our lives to begin to speak to us, once the noise of the world has faded into the background, the voice of our life can be made known. As we quiet our minds and listen to the voice within, it speaks the truth that has called us into being, and it speaks that which makes us extraordinary. The call of vocation is to speak new life and to embody the wholeness of life itself. Vocation is the thing that we must do once we recognize it. Life is living a vocation, and it's not something that occurs in the recesses of our mind, for it is a new life emerging within us. Our vocation is an inward declaration of life and how we individually and collectively belong to this world. As students of Science of Mind, we understand that Spirit expresses uniquely through each of us, according to our individual talents and abilities. Vocation, then, from a Science of Mind perspective, can be thought of as that which we find most compelling as our outlet for creative expression. And again, I turn to Parker Palmer, for he has an interesting take on this idea of vocation. He says, Vocation at its deepest level is this something I can't not do, for reasons I'm unable to explain to anyone and don't fully understand myself, but that are nonetheless compelling. I'm going to read this one again because there's a lot to unpack in this. Vocation at its deepest level is this something I can't not do, for reasons I'm unable to explain to anyone else and don't fully understand myself, but that are nonetheless compelling. You may at some point have heard the workshop question, if money and health were no obstacle, what would you do with your life? Well, considering this question, I believe, begins to get at what Palmer is talking about as this something I can't not do. And in line with this idea, I've heard artists express a similar notion that they must create their art or they would get sick. Something within them that must be expressed. In a slightly different vein, Wayne Dyer said, "Don't die with your music still in you." And it's easy to believe that we are already living the life that we're supposed to be living. Excuse me. In his poem, Ask Me, William Stafford wrote, "Ask me whether I have done what I have done is my life." His point here is that we may be living in response to outward circumstances rather than inward desire. When this happens, we must listen to our life to find that center point within. One sure indication of a true life's work is having that something we would do whether or not we get paid for it. Of course, for those of us who do need to bring in enough income to sustain ourselves, our joy is then finding a paying gig that allows us to live a vocation that fulfills us monetarily and spiritually. Remember that career book with that catchy title, "Do What You Love and the Money Will Follow"? To follow the leadings of the heart is to give expression to our calling. Our vocation is an inward declaration of life and how we individually and collectively belong to this world. When we finally decide to free ourselves from the image of the impossible, our next steps are into a space and time where we get to declare, I am possibility. As I was working on the outline for the talk this past Thursday, the news came across that Britain's Queen Elizabeth had passed away at the age of 96. And while I've never been a royal watcher in any way, I was drawn to the media coverage of her passing, especially given that she's been the only British monarch in my lifetime. Until Thursday, there had always been, and in some strange way it seemed like there always would be, a Queen Elizabeth. This, in spite of my logical thinking that given her age, I knew at some point she would pass on. But it felt odd that this person who I never met but had always been there was now gone. And I noticed this synchronicity of learning about her passing while preparing this message. My bringing this up is not to voice a tribute to her. I'll leave that to those who are better qualified in current and historical events. But for me, it's briefly to focus on her life's work and what that can mean for us in today's topic of creating a life that matters. Whatever your feelings about the Queen, the royal family, or even the appropriateness of a monarchy at all in this year 2022, no one else I know in modern times has held the same job for 70 years. During that same time, the U.S. has had 14 presidents, from Harry Truman all the way to Joe Biden, all of whom the Queen had personally met, with the exception of Lyndon Johnson. I don't know the backstory on why the Queen and President Johnson never met in person, but that's a story for another time. Regarding her ascension to the throne, you might say, well, she was born into it. She lived a life of privilege. She came from a wealthy family. She had lots of help. All of those may be true enough, but it's worth remembering that had her Uncle Edward not abdicated the throne to Elizabeth's father, she would not have been in the line of succession at all. She was 10 years old when her father unexpectedly became king, when Edward gave up the throne. Her life took a major turn as she became heir apparent, and then had to grapple with the prospect of someday becoming queen. It obviously weighed on her. On her 21st birthday in 1947, while the royal family was in South Africa on a world tour, she introduced herself to the British Commonwealth in a radio address that would come to define her life's work. In part, she said, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." At that time, neither she nor anyone else could have predicted that just 5 short years later, she would be elevated to the British throne at age 26. Remarkable to me is that this young woman, when she was 21, not only articulated her life's calling, but was able to fulfill her declaration in a full-time job that lasted 70 years. I see in the life of the young Princess Elizabeth, regardless of her station in life, an example of someone who, in light of the unknowable path before her, was able to recognize and to articulate a life's calling. The point for us in this story is that while we are each born with our own talents, abilities, and in our own circumstances, it is up to each of us to recognize and cultivate our calling, our passion, our vocation, regardless of the conditions in which we find ourselves. Of course, there are few people walking this earth who would ever find themselves in the circumstances similar to those of Elizabeth. But there are those among us who do know at an early age what they want to do in life. They pursue their passion, and they find deep satisfaction in their work. There are also many of us who find ourselves in jobs or professions that may have come to us by a chance meeting or an event, which at the time sounded exciting and later turned out to be less fulfilling than we'd hoped. For some of us, recognizing that our current work is not fulfilling gives us an opportunity to listen to the voice within and to set out on a new path. For others of us, where a complete change of scene may not be currently practical, the invitation becomes one of finding meaning within our current surroundings, discovering the joy of serving where we are, until such a time as we can reevaluate our path and move on to something more meaningful. Essentially, it's an inside job, so to speak. Regardless of what we do to support ourselves, our work can be just a means to collect a paycheck, or it can be a meaningful, fulfilling way to express our passion for life. In the coming days, ask yourself, are you living the life you imagined? If you are, how so? If not, how would you like to live your life? And then sit quietly in the divine presence and listen as your life speaks. So let us affirm that today is the day that we allow our inner life to speak for us, shining the light that is emerging as us. When our lives speak for us, they speak words of purpose, intention, and wholeness, bringing us into the allness of who we have been called to be in the world. There is no greater self-esteem booster than knowing who we are and feeling passionate about what we have to offer the waiting world. Letting your life speak is about making room in your soul for the signs and messages in and around you that lift you up. Remember that vocation is not a title, it's not a role, a job, or an occupation, but it is the quiet yes that whispers to the soul. These are essential elements that must be embraced in this now moment and invited into our being. Your life will never stop speaking to you. It's up to each of us to listen for the sounds of the creation of a life that matters, now more than ever. And let me share with you now the affirmation for the day. The work of my soul is creating a life that matters. So if you would, join me now in a time of prayer. What I know and what I affirm in this time and in this place is that we are surrounded by this incredible power, presence, this one mind from which all things have been created. And I know that the all in that statement means all of us as well. For each of us are a part of that creation. Each of us are a part of that divine mind. And as such, each of us are imbued with that creative ability. We are created with that ability to be able to shape our lives. And it begins by listening to that part of us, that soulful place within, that knows why we are here. That each and every one of us has a calling. Each of us has a purpose. Each of us, as Wayne Dyer says, has music within us that needs to come out. And that comes out as our vocation, our purpose, our calling. And so let us this day give honor to that. Let us honor that within us, which becomes our creative expression. And so I just speak that to our community of Vida this morning, that each of us finds that place within, that place that we contribute to the world. And so I give thanks for knowing that truth, for knowing that within us there is that power of creativity. And so right now, I will just allow these thoughts, these words, to be released into the creative law, knowing that it takes that which we give, that which we put into it, and brings it into manifestation. And so I will say, and now it is, and so it is. Amen. Thank you for being with us this morning.